What's up, guys? Welcome to the Saturday show. Now, on Saturdays, I like to go back through the week of Newswave, see what you guys had to say based on the different topics that we talked about. This past week, had a lot of anticipation, hoping for some sort of event from Nintendo, or there's a Direct, or I don't know, just a drop for like a Nintendo Direct Mini. We had that last year, so it's not necessarily out of the question for that to happen. But we went through the week, not much happened, had some announcements though, and maybe next week, I don't know. There's still some stuff left to be announced, so we'll see what ends up happening here going through the rest of January. However, we did have some fun stuff going on throughout the week that we're going to go through here today. As always, guys, enjoy these videos, hit the like button, it does help out. We're going to start with a bit of news today, and it's around Fallout 76. Now, I'm not really surprised by anything from Fallout 76 at this point, because at one point we were sitting around talking about canvas bags that they could not fulfill. So yeah, that's kind of where we sunk to with this whole thing. So when we talk about a secret developer room that was found in Fallout 76, it doesn't sound too surprising at first, mostly because, well, I remember specifically that Skyrim had one. So what's the big deal with that then? Well, an odd thing was found in there. One, an NPC is just kind of walking around in there, which is weird because the idea was that Fallout 76, I guess according to Bethesda, was that there are no NPCs because they want player interaction. But yeah, there's no NPCs unless you're in this developer room. The other issue is because this is not a single player game like a Skyrim or even like a Fallout 4 or something, and it's a fully online game, well, these developer rooms generally have all of the weapons, all of the armor, and including some that are actually not even released yet, because this is pretty much a test room. Now, it seems that the people who got into this room, which a lot of people have over the past couple weeks apparently, and it's become public recently, they use different ways to get in there that you normally wouldn't. Specifically, it sounds like they were hacking into the code of game and getting themselves in there. The problem you run into now is that the armor sets, for example, have left the room, and they are now trying to trade or even sell these armor sets that are not actually in the game. And in fact, Fallout and Bethesda started banning accounts. That's why you're not seeing any footage of the secret room here, because I noticed that some videos actually had theirs pulled down randomly, and a lot of people are speculating it might be because Bethesda is kind of going around taking them down. So interesting stuff there. And again, it's just something left in the game that probably shouldn't have been. Although if like Skyrim and Fallout and stuff had it, then of course this probably would as well, because it seems to be a way that they actually test the stuff in the game. But it could do things like hurt the economy in the game, or who knows. We'll see. It sounds like they're already working on, I guess, trying to seal it off completely. But at least for now, yeah, there's some secret developer room in Fallout 76 that's already being exploited, and it has an NPC in it for some unknown reason. Who really knows? Maybe they're even testing them for a future update. This is, again, a live service game, so I guess anything is on the table and anything could change. And starting the week on Monday, we talked about Furukawa discussing Nintendo's future with their game consoles. He mentioned the companies need to be flexible and change with the times, which could someday include moving away from consoles if that's what the market was calling for at the time. Rick says, if gaming turns to streaming games, I'm out of gaming and I'll stick with my retro consoles. When I buy something, I like ownership, and that's going to be, I think, one of the hardest things for these companies to do is actually convince people who like to either have the game digitally on their hard drive, of course, locally, or who actually like to go out and buy games and put them on their shelves and everything. Convince them that streaming is basically the same, although I feel like we have a bit of a ways to go, definitely in the US anyway, in terms of our infrastructure for things like our internet connection. Yeah, we still have a ways to go there, as there's still a lot of people who don't have a reliable, solid, fast connection, because we've seen, like, for example, we saw Google talk about like a 25 megabit connection up and down, I guess, to actually play the game well enough, because you don't want buffering, you don't want some terrible looking encoding stuff all over your screen, and you want it to be responsive. So I think we still have a bit of ways to go. 5G apparently is really going to help kick things off, supposedly. We'll see, as that's supposed to be showing up and testing and stuff this year, and we'll see what happens there, even possibly in the next year, because these things get delayed. But streaming is going to be tough to convince people. The good news is, if you don't like streaming, there are a lot of games that you could probably work on collecting and playing. I mean, some people's backlog is massive. I have a backlog of games as well. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff I'd go back and I guess start collecting if streaming became the norm and it wasn't great yet. Although there is a chance that streaming could evolve and become the norm, as that's what everyone seems to want in these third-party companies. Although consumers, from what I see online, are generally against it. However, the cell phone community might not be. I mean, think about it this way. A lot of people weren't happy with Alien Blackout, right, online that we saw, but the game will probably still sell a lot and do well in terms of the online, or at least the cell phone community, right, that are playing these games online a lot with like Clash of Clans and Candy Crush Saga and things like that. They make a lot of money. And that's not necessarily because the hardcore gamers are following it there, it's because the casual audience latches on. Tuesday, we saw massive sales numbers released by Sony, with the PlayStation 4 now eclipsing 91 million consoles sold, and Spider-Man selling 9 million copies by the end of November. With the gaming landscape pushing hard towards live services, it's good to see single-player games still pushing big numbers. Renegade says 9 million copies of Spider-Man. Single-player narrative-driven story games are far from dead. Take that, Activision Blizzard and EA. Yeah, as we all have been seeing, they all want us to move into live services, essentially because they don't have to make as many games as they would have to previously. Think towards like the PS2, the GameCube, and the Xbox era. EA was around, right? Activision was around. These companies that people don't like now because of live services were around, and they were making games a lot. Rockstar was making games constantly, and they figured out that they don't really have to because of live services and GTA 5 being very, very lucrative online, and then they just stopped making as many games. Midnight Club is that's probably not coming back for a long time. Even Manhunt's been retired. You can look through Rockstar's list of games that they used to make throughout the 2000s, and then once they figured out GTA 5, they just stopped, right? It's the way it is now. However, Spider-Man and God of War, for example, Super Mario Odyssey, Zelda, you can look through all these single-player games, and they do sell well. They really do. And then you have add-on DLC for some of them. Obviously, Zelda had it. Spider-Man has had it. God of War's had free DLC so far, essentially updates, I guess, New Game Plus, stuff like that. But yes, you're right. The real question is going to be, can a new IP single-player game that, like one that's coming up obviously with Sony right now, is Ghost of Tsushima. Can that sell really, really well, as that appears to be, again, a single-player focused game? Days Gone, I don't know how well that's going to do. That hasn't had great marketing or press so far, and people aren't even that. I don't hear a lot of people talk about Days Gone. So we'll see when it's something that's not Spider-Man, right? Something that's not covered in Marvel, you know? Like people already know Spider-Man. People are buying it because it's Spider-Man. Will people buy Ghost of Tsushima because it's Ghost of Tsushima? That's the big question. I think that's going to be a big test, and I hope that does release in 2019. I hope Last of Us 2 also released in 2019, although I'm thinking Last of Us 2 could end up in 2020, but if they are going to make that big push towards the PlayStation 5 in 2020, they might want to have these big hitters. That, you know, Death Stranding and Ghost of Tsushima all out in 2019. But those are going to be the big tests. New IPs that aren't very well known, can they sell as well as something like a Spider-Man or a God of War on Sony's console? Wednesday, we had another port announced for the Switch with Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen, now moving over to the hybrid system. We also had the NES Online games announced for January, with Blaster Master and Zelda 2 becoming available January 16th. Japan will get a third game as well, called Joy Mech Fight. Steven says, by the time the Switch gets SNES games and N64 games, the Switch will be irrelevant and outdated. Why doesn't Nintendo just say, okay, if you want NES and SNES games, it's $40 a year. If you want NES and SNES and N64 games at $60 a year, I would pay more if they offered quality retro games that I really wanted. So I do think that is eventually their end goal, because I don't think they could offer that many retro games for $20 a year. I think there eventually will be a tiered system, and that's just, I don't think they're willing to devalue their IPs or their older games in that fashion, to where $20 gets you hundreds of games. It doesn't even make business sense if you really think about it. Like, if you're running Nintendo, wouldn't you just up the price if you're going to start adding that many games, especially if you do things like Super Nintendo, N64, GameCube? You have a massive library, but I mean, $20 a year isn't a lot for all of that, right? Especially if your online service evolves, which it absolutely needs to, and I would hope it does. You know, like, you should be able to send somebody a message on your friends list. I don't think that should even be a question at this point, but it is. So if they do get to that point, it might even split off from the online service, like how we have Game Pass at $10 per month, and then you also have the online Live Gold service. That might be what happens here. This might become its own app, no longer tied to the online service, and that's how you actually pay for things. You maybe $10 a month actually would be something they would shoot towards, and it might just become like the entire Nintendo library, Nintendo archive, if you will, of retro games. And I think people would still pay for that, especially if the online service was like 20 or 30 a year and it was, better. And then you have the option of $10 a month for these older games. I actually think you would have more people buying in, and they would definitely make more money, because then instead of $20 a year, you would all of a sudden go to $120 a year. YOLO says no January Direct because they just gave Yoshi release date randomly. So I saw this a lot as well. If Yoshi got a release date, if these NES games were announced, there's really no need to have a Nintendo Direct. Well, that's not exactly correct, as of course we know Yoshi is coming later on in March, and that's cool. It's good to see. Yoshi should be interesting. Unreal Engine, we'll see what Nintendo does with that and how it performs and everything and how it plays. Should be fun. However, just because Yoshi got a release date, these NES games were announced, doesn't mean that there's no event of some kind coming, because it does very much seem like there is something coming. Something's happening, whether it's a Direct or a Mini or who knows. There's a lot of stuff that could still be shown off, not necessarily a massive Direct even. So there is something apparently happening, some kind of event. So keep that in mind. However, getting Yoshi's release date is pretty cool. They could still show it in their event that they have, right? That could still happen. The NES games could get another push maybe, or maybe they drop some really cool release, because remember, we only got 2 in the US, whereas Japan got 3. Why is that? Why did we only get 2 when we usually get 3 games? It's almost like there's one game that's not announced yet that they still need to give us. And that's the question. Why 2? So keep that in mind too, as well as we go forward, because it does seem like Nintendo has something up their sleeve for January. Thursday, we saw Ubisoft go to the Epic Store with their games completely bypassing Steam. This is a big deal, as games like The Division 2 and future Ubisoft games will not appear on Steam, instead being found on Epic Store and their Uplay Store. With Epic turning up the heat on Valve, could we see Steam maybe sign some companies here soon? Obi-Wan Gaming says Half-Life 3 now exclusive on the Epic Store. So I know it's a joke, obviously. Half-Life 3 is a meme at this point. However, competition would be key to get Half-Life 3 out there. That makes sense, right? Think about it this way. If Epic Store continues to sign companies, bring them in with exclusivity because obviously their rates are better than Steam, what do you do if you are Valve? You start developing games again, because that's the one thing you have over Epic is something like a Half-Life 3, right? They could start doing stuff like maybe a new Portal, a new Team Fortress. They could really start cranking up the heat on their side with game development, because I think most of us see Valve as lackadaisical. They weren't doing much, right? It's good to see Epic Store show up because it gives Valve actually a reason to make a game like a Half-Life 3. Because if it drops on Steam and if it's exclusive to Steam, like we would assume, I wouldn't expect that on consoles at this point. It's PC only, it's on Steam, you want it, you go on Steam. All of a sudden, a lot of people are going to rush Steam, as they have been prior to Epic Store now, starting to sign these deals up. And you give Steam a reason to kind of, look at Epic and laugh, because they're not going to get Half-Life 3 at that point. So while this is a joke, Half-Life 3 continues to be a meme, competition might actually make it become a reality. Finally, on Friday, we went over release dates for both Final Fantasy X 10-2 and Final Fantasy XII, with 10 and 10-2 coming out April 16th, and 12 following on the 30th, going to the Switch and the Xbox One. Both will be released physically, and now we just need to wait for release dates for the others, including Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy IX. Alice says, we need Final Fantasy VIII on Switch as well. So the rabbit hole that is Final Fantasy VIII is crazy. It's clear that there's something wrong there, right? It sounds like, based on a lot of people's research and thoughts on the matter, it seems that something was lost. Something is hard to port from that. It seems like source code or just saved parts of the game in development were not saved correctly. There's a lot of thoughts around this. It's hard to say unless Square actually tells us. But here's the thing about Final Fantasy VIII that's very interesting to look at. We are now in 2019. We're 20 years past Final Fantasy VIII's release date, right? We're in that year, right? It came out in 1999. We're now in 2019. Square seems to really like these anniversaries. We're missing 8. We're getting all of these other games. It is at least on Steam, but it's nowhere else. It's not even on mobile. Like, you don't put it on mobile. That's where they always put these things. So maybe the 20th anniversary actually has something for us, right? Maybe Final Fantasy VIII gets something this year. I don't know if it'll be a full remake. I don't think it would be, because we're still waiting for Final Fantasy VII's remake, and that is obviously a bigger Final Fantasy if you look at recognition overall in the gaming space. But maybe they have been working on porting it behind closed doors. They haven't said anything about it publicly. They've said, maybe we'll look into it. Maybe this year is the year that they actually bring it over to the PlayStation 4, the Xbox, and the Switch. Realistically, if they're gonna do it, the 20th anniversary makes a lot of sense. But for now, we'll wait and see if they have any kind of announcement for us this year. If they don't, there's not much else to look forward to when it comes to anniversaries, and then we'll just have to hope that they just randomly drop it. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for the Saturday show. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit the like button. It does help out. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below, whether it's about Fallout 76's secret developer room that seems to be leaking these unreleased items to the world, and people are trading them and attempting to sell them and getting banned everywhere doing it. Let me know what you think about that whole situation down below. Also, what about the Final Fantasy games showing up on Switch and Xbox? What do you think about Final Fantasy VIII? And would you like to see Valve push so hard by Epic that they actually make Half-Life 3 just because of competition? Let me know, guys, down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.